All right, about 2 minutes after 2. Okay, I'm going to call the special call meeting of the Police Records Management System Oversight Committee to order. Today being January 17th, 2024, and we have a physical quorum of the members present. I'm going to entertain a motion to permit Member Scalera, who's not physically present due to personal illness or disability, employment purposes, or for the business of the board, or family or other emergency, to participate by video or teleconference.
So, second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So no opposed, motion carries. We'll start with a roll call.
Berlin,
Here.
Conroy,
Here.
Fieldman,
Here.
Franz, Maranowicz,
Here.
Martinovich,
Here.
McPherson,
Here.
Vendrick,
Here.
Ritz, Scalera,
Here.
Bennett, here, Zerwin.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, great. All right, on to the order of chairman's remarks. I just want to thank Chief Brian Cunningham, who is retiring from the Woodbridge Police Department. You know, there's a little going away celebration for him tomorrow at 5 p.m. at the Woodbridge Village Hall. Thank him for all of his years of service, first at Naperville, and then the last 7 years as chief at Woodbridge. Done an outstanding job and was actually able to get a brand new police station built there. So we wish him the best. On to the order of public comment. Do we have any public comment?
We do not.
Okay, there being none, we can move into our discussion items. Items 5A, B, and C, I think they're gonna kind of all be
That's right.
intertwined together.
Yeah.
Anthony, I think I will turn it over to
Thank
you.
you very much,
Right.
Chairman. So bring up the presentation. So we, when we last met in December, we covered the IGA funding models and some other items. The special call will help us address those things. So we will specifically go over requested revisions to the IGA, and the goal is the hope is that we get consensus to move forward to share the IGA with the agencies for them to review and sign and get back to us before the due date and before April. And then there's a new item, internal review. We've done some cleanup work on our finances, some directly, some indirectly related to what we're doing here with billing. But we need to cover that with you guys to bring an update. And then the last thing is we talked about funding models. You know, how do we bring ourselves current, and how do we get to a point where we are not only invoicing in the same year, but paying our bills in the same year. So we'll talk about funding models. We developed 3 funding models, which we believe you guys would appreciate. One in particular we recommend, but we wanted to lay out all options so that you are fully aware of what those options are. We'll talk about them. Don Ehrenhalf will actually cover that portion of the presentation. And then at the very end, we hope that you will make a selection. That selection will then be included in the IGA. So, all right, so I'll start out with the changes with the IGA. I apologize. I added probably too many words here, but I'll summarize. So when we met last, I think we had a pretty solid document, but there, Member Franz, Member Feldman, and a few others had some recommended changes. So we've made those changes, and I just want to highlight the major changes. There were some small things like formatting edits that we did as well, but I'm gonna highlight the things that are important. I sent the updated version to you guys yesterday. I hope you had a chance to look at it and focus on these things, but these are the things that were actually modified. So the first thing is We added in there a transition, basically, dealing with the equipment replacement fund to a reserve fund. It was recommended that in order to bring us current, that maybe we create a reserve fund, which was separate from the equipment fund. We took that into consideration. We made that change within the document. Please keep in mind though, that we may make a change depending on which funding model you choose, right? So there's a funding model that covers uses the reserve fund. There's a funding model that uses the equipment replacement fund, and there's a funding model that deals with double billing. Depending on which option you guys choose, this language may change. But right now, for consistency, we went with the reserve fund, which is now in the IGA. Second item we changed was there were inconsistencies. Some places we identified equipment placement fund, some places we had reserve fund, some places we had both. So we cleaned that up so that it's just one fund. It's really two, the ops fund and the reserve fund. So we cleaned that part up, and that was per the members' recommendation. We also added in there authorization for the Oversight Committee to invoice our agencies for annual audit costs. We talked about that before. ETSB is currently covering those costs. So the goal is to separate the PRMS audit costs and make that part of our annual billing. So that's covered in the ITA.
And if I can just
Sure.
reference, it's in 2.07 in case anybody's trying to look at that as well.
All right, we also introduced language that requires the committee to discuss the future of the PRMS system. So we've kind of talked about that in the past. What are we going to do in the future? Do we stick with Hexagon and move forward with an upgrade sometime in the future and renew our contract? Or do we consider a different option? So we put that in here. The reason why we put it in here for May of 2025, we have to renew by 2027, so it gives us time to make a decision. If we decide to go with a different solution, we have time to issue an RFP, select a solution, and go through the transition. That's not going to be an easy transition. It's going to take a couple of years for it to happen. So that's in there. So May 2025, by that time, this committee has to discuss the options and make a choice. Do we stick with Hexagon and renew, or do we look at a different solution? And then the last big point is we also included some language that specifies all members have to stay with the consortium until the end of the current Hexagon contract. The main reason there is to help us soften the financial impact to all other agencies. So if one agency decides to move out, it impacts all. So the goal is to ensure that that doesn't happen. So to the end of the contract. So those are the main things. Again, we also completed some miscellaneous things, but those are the big changes. So I want to take 2 seconds out, Chairman, if you don't mind.
Sure,
Open it
please.
up to questions.
Can I just add a couple
Sure.
of things? So basically, the contract that we're talking about, that would end in April of 2027.
Correct.
So, and then it's in 7.03, which talks about going, what the group will decide next spring as far as the future of the program. So it's written into the agreement to give some assurances that this is going to take place. And then, once spring of 2027 comes along, there will be a clear path on next steps. And that was what we were trying to accomplish.
Any other questions, comments? David?
Thank you. The requirement that member agencies remain with the consortium until the end of the Hexagon contract. Where is that in the agreement? I'm going to take a quick look at it. I'm specifically looking for what.
Section 7.03, I believe, is when it kicks into terms and termination, so it should really just be Article 7, most of Article 7. You'll see some.
It's 7.02, right?
Well, yes, 2, I'm sorry.
Are there any penalties?
Not that we've written out, no, but I think it's more of a, let's go through this and hope that works out.
The biggest impact to us is if a member leaves during the current term of the contract, there's a financial impact, right, to all. So we're trying to minimize that. And we think by adding in that language, we do that.
We also thought it was cleaner if we went ahead and had a clear path, so next spring, you would know exactly what the next steps are, so that way, you know, your obligation is until the spring of 2027, but you'll know next spring if, you know, you choose to go a different direction. So it leads planning for everybody, for the municipal partners. and everything. But
Upon looking at the contract, we, you know, as we've seen the process of getting your new one started, this kind of fits that timeline of contract regardless. So we kind of figured that it would work in regards to like the time of determining what you're doing and getting yourself set up. Of course, we hope everybody stays, but
We do. We want to add us back.
Well, and I think the other concern was that, to your point, it does take so long to start up a new program, and we're seeing
does.
that with Addison, that it doesn't make sense really to let people out during the term because it's not really feasible for them or for us.
And those 2 or 3 years is basically the amount of time it would take you to transition anyway to a new solution or move over to a new solution. So you really don't lose much. So it's a complex system, a lot of data. It takes time to get to that point. Even where we are with this, with the current PRMS system, it took years to get here. Okay, any other questions before I move on? All right, so that is all the updates related to IGA. We hope at the very end, you guys give us the okay to kind of move forward with the IGA as it is. The next piece is internal financial review. So recently, as part of this process and in general, we've been doing a better job at crossing the T's and dotting the I's for PRMS management. During this process, we did identify that there was a funding piece that was out of whack. Essentially, there was an item that we did not account for back in 2022. And that item essentially is the restatement cost that increased in 2022. If you all remember, we negotiated a new contract with Hexagon. They came back with a completely new contract, but the restatement was higher than what it was previously. Unfortunately, the full amount that year was the adjusted amount was not billed to the agencies. That amount is $110,963. We owe that amount to ETSB. So they've been footing that bill. So in addition to that, we also have to charge a one-time fee because we're like 6 months behind of $33,807.84 to bring basically invoicing current. So it's a combination of 22 and last year, the $33,000, which brings us current. How does it impact you directly? Well, essentially, it's about $20.36 per user per year. I'm going to move to the next slide, which kind of show that it's hard to see. I see now. Sorry about that from here. I can see it better, but I'll explain it to you. If you look at the bottom is where the meat is, where it shows the adjustment. It basically shows the $110,963 that we still owe from 22, then add 33,807,000 from 23, and that shows us the $144,777.84 that we're behind. So in order to bring us current, ETSB has agreed to allow us to pay this back over a 4-year period. So the amount is roughly $36,192.71 spread across a 4-year period. And again, it's roughly $20.36 per user per year. for the agency, but it'll pay back that money and bring us concurrent. So I'm gonna give you a second to look, and if there are any questions, I'd like to address your questions. We have put, while you do that, we have put a new process in place to ensure this doesn't happen in the future, right? We're gonna make sure that we catch these things. If there is an adjustment, we make the adjustment as well. We did not do that, and we didn't catch it until now.
This is a billing issue between ETSB and
Yeah, exactly.
not.
Correct. No, it's just us and ETSB. So we signed the contract with Hexagon. ETSB paid them the new amount. We owe that new amount, but we were still paying the old amount, which was $150,000 less than what we should have. Questions, concerns? Okay. Moving on to the next piece. Now I'm going to hand it over to Don Ehrenhat. I'm going to talk about the three models that we talked about, funding models, to bring us current with our billing.
Nobody minds if I stand up, because I don't want everybody to crane their neck. So really the issue right now that we're trying to address, I think everybody here knows it. We borrow money to fund everything each year from the general fund and ETSB. And the goal is to stop doing that for various reasons. We had some requirements that we wanted to meet. Basically, we need to be financially self-sufficient within, by the end of this current Hexagon contract. We wanted to make sure that the impact on the agencies was as small as possible, because we realized that this is money moving around. This isn't your day-to-day operations. And we wanted to make sure that the equipment replacement fund, which right at the beginning of this IGA was earmarked for the replacement of the system, wasn't compromised in any significant way. So we put together three funding models, like Anthony said earlier. Each model prioritizes those requirements a little bit differently to give you some options and flexibility in your decision. We can play. So this is also hard to see here. This is really a summary of the three models. The first one's a double billing model, where we essentially, and we staggered it over a few years, so it's not all at once, but basically we're asking the agencies to pay twice in given years. We'll look at the numbers in a little more detail in a moment. It's going to be just as hard to see as this, but we'll try. The second one is the reserve fund, which I believe, Member Fieldman, you suggested last time. It creates a separate reserve fund that is funded along with the equipment replacement fund that sort of gradually builds. And the last one, it just kind of shifts how we use the equipment replacement fund. And full disclosure, that's the best one. In this summary here, you can see the impact. The top row is going to be your accumulated per user cost for each model. And you have this in your packet as well. One of the reasons I like the equipment replacement fund model is because it is the same per user cost as you currently have. It doesn't actually cost you any more money. And it does actually lead to more money in your equipment replacement fund than you would have had if you stayed the current course. We'll talk more about this. This breaks it down into your annual user costs. If we can go to the next slide. So I made a couple of assumptions when putting this together. One of them is that the committee does intend to continue contributing to the equipment replacement fund. That's not, that was just an assumption. No one actually said that, but I'm sorry, can we go back? Another one is I put an annual 2.5% increase into the equipment replacement fund just to combat inflation. That's negotiable, of course, but what that does is make sure that we hit the mark, because the original mark was 3 million. It makes sure that we hit that with every model. It also, instead of any little thing, particularly inflation. I made the assumption that 3 million was still the mark, which was something that needed to be discussed anyway, because under the current model, it would have been shortfall. And the other assumption is that $20.36 per user increase that we just talked about. We can move on. This is the funds flow for the double billing model. The top chart, and again, you have these in your packet as well. The top chart is the equipment replacement fund, and it just continues to operate as usual, no activity there. The bottom one is the operations fund. You can see on all three of these models, there are color-coded cells. The yellow ones are when we are off of the general fund. That's the year that we're paying our own personnel costs. The green ones are when we're paying our operations costs. We're no longer borrowing from ETSB. In this model, basically in FY '24, you're billed twice for personnel because you're paying 25 personnel costs in advance. And in '26, you're billed twice for operations because you're paying 27's operations costs in advance. It does have a significantly higher per user cost. But the fund balance doesn't change on that one, the equipment replacement fund balance. So the overall non-ERF contributions are higher, so it will cost more. We can go to the next one. This is with the reserve fund. The way this model operates, as well as the next one, is it essentially borrows from the money that is in the equipment replacement fund right now. And for the sake of illustration, it's sort of notionally borrowed on January 1st and then paid back later in the year, but it's progressive throughout the year in reality. So each year in FY '24, conceivably, we could be off of the general fund for personnel, just out of the equipment replacement fund. This is going to be your pre-reimbursement column. That's what we're at after we borrow, before we invoice, if that makes sense. Later in the year, that gets replenished with the money we invoice to agencies. And then the same thing down here in FY '26. We have to add a buffer year in there because we need to make sure that we have enough to pay personnel and that we'll have enough to pay for ops in FY '26. I can't see the green here, but there it is. It looks the same way, it operates the same way. The difference between this and the last one and the next one is that there's this additional reserve fund. It's created in FY '24 with a seed contribution of $100,000. And there's an inverse proportionality between the equipment replacement fund and the reserve fund at 5%. So ERF contributions go down by 5% each year. Reserve fund contributions go up by 5% each year to kind of make sure you have some seed money. This model, it's not great. It is more expensive. And ultimately, you end up missing your ERF balance by a little bit. And you really only have about $500,000 seed money in the reserve fund. So there would still need to be another year or so of feeding into that to get it totally self-sufficient. But it's a functional model, if not ideal. And then the next one, which is definitely our recommendation, does not create that reserve fund, but it does use the equipment replacement fund transactionally. It borrows, the operations fund borrows from the reserve fund and replenishes it with the invoiced funds. This model is just like the previous one. You're never more than a year or a full calendar year away from the fund being replenished. So if at any point there is a decision to go and get a new system, the equipment replacement fund remains strong, essentially, especially because that borrowing is progressive throughout the year. I said a lot of stuff, so I'll stop. Any questions?
And I want to just make sure all the members are clear on this third option. So it's really just borrowing from the equipment replacement fund the same year or replacing it the same year. So we can do that and not charge the member agencies anything additional if we do that. Now, we do lose a little bit in interest, right, in our bank account. So that is the only negative part to it, but I think overall it gets us to where we need to be within a fairly reasonable time period. Within 2026, we will be off. 2024 will be off of the DuPage County General Fund, and then in 2026 off the ETSB support.
So under this model, we wouldn't require a minimum balance then in the reserve fund.
So
like we had previous.
There could still be a minimum balance. I would recommend 500,000 as a minimum balance. Just for, you just mean in an annual cycle, right?
Right, that's why, because obviously we left that blank in the agreement at 6.03.1. We left that blank because we weren't sure which direction the group
Right,
wanted to
yeah.
go.
I would recommend it, but that's actually based on how this functions. That's actually, we would never get that low unless something, unless we hired several people suddenly, which.
Get that thought, people.
No, I think it just depends on, your moving model, and if you don't put it in the IGA because you'd want it to be more flexible based on where you decided to go. And how many people moved forward in the next RFP, because you would want to fund from that point because you'd know what your costs would be.
I did have a thought on that as well. I think possibly a more functional number to have in there is the end balance.
Right.
We should have a target balance as opposed to a minimum. Sir,
Yes. Don't we really have an idea on what we'll need in the future for equipment replacement by now?
We don't, right?
No.
Because we don't know what the solution will be. We have we have an idea, but we don't have a solid number of what it would cost. So
Do we have a range?
we do. Put that in, is what you're saying?
1 million, 3 million?
Yeah, it'll be probably anywhere from 2 million to 3 million. So
On this scenario, I forgot my glasses. I'm looking, what
it's
is,
very small,
what is the ending equipment replacement balance?
slightly over 3 million.
Oh, okay.
yeah, a little over 3.
In our internal discussions, we talked about special assessment if need be, but that never made it to the,
We didn't think, based on these 3 options, we didn't think we need the special assessment.
So when we get to the point of replacing this software, what happens if we don't have the money and we need it?
So if I understand the question, so if, let's say at the end of this current contract, we buy a new system. Are you saying what happens if we don't have this balance at that time?
No, what happens if we don't have enough money when we need to purchase new software?
Well, I mean, typically the contract
If
would
it's
be,
more than 3 million.
it would typically be set, payments are set at milestones. So there wouldn't be a scenario, if I'm speaking out of turn, let me know. I can't imagine a scenario where you would write a check for 3 million on day one. It would be spaced out over the term of the contract.
Okay, so during the term of this contract, we won't be replacing any equipment.
We actually just did in 2022, we just purchased all new hardware.
I remember that. Okay. So we think we're good for
We are good.
Yeah,
till
absolutely.
2027?
2027, April.
Okay, so we'll have another contract come before us.
Correct.
And
And
we'll
we'll make
really
a
have a-
decision next year on whether we do the renewal and have a hexagon contract or.
So no matter what, we'll have, if we use this model, you'll have really good seed money to
Correct.
be able to do what you want to do.
We believe it, yeah.
And can I ask the IT experts in the room again? Right now, we obviously have the physical hardware for this, but there's cloud-based solutions that possibly it's a different cost, right? It would, okay, I'm looking at all
Look
three
over
of you.
there.
Sorry, I'm looking at all 3 of you. But
Over there.
would there be a substantial cost difference between
It could be.
okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot to ask that question.
Yeah, it could be. So it could be less depending on. our
That's kinda what I
needs
was-
And our membership could be more, depending on what solution we select.
And the
So
reason I asked that question is, Don, to your point of, maybe a target as opposed to a minimum. That's why I was asking if
Yeah.
possibility is something cheaper, if we're at a target at least, that
I think
makes
there
me
is,
more
that's why I
comfortable.
said 2 million or 3 million before. I think there is a little bit of wiggle room. I think when whoever created the $3 million target, this entire committee at the time, they really considered a lot of different options. I think, from my perspective, 3 million is pretty substantial. I think we could probably negotiate something less. Don't know, don't hold me to it because, I don't know what we're gonna select, but from a Hexagon perspective, I think we'll be in good shape.
Other comments, questions? Concerns?
So just to reiterate, this model here, which seems like the best model to me, accomplishes the goals of getting out of ETSB funding or borrowing
By 2026.
by 2026. It gets the county off the use of the general fund for the personnel,
By 2024.
and it funds the operations of PRMS using the equipment replacement, which can be, once the billings are recovered or paid, replenishes the equipment replacement fund, so it keeps us solvent.
It does.
So 2027,
Does all of that.
right? Okay.
I think I'd like to hear from the municipal side. I think the county, we've heard it from that side, and it hits some of the concerns we had and desires, our municipal members. I want to know, is that something that will work for the end user in that regard too? Because this does make the most sense without having to do the double billing or anything like that and charging the end users more.
I'm supportive of it, because of that fact, so.
Okay.
Well, this method does two things. It sets what your fees will be over the next several years, and you're getting to where you want to be. And by next spring, you'll know the further direction with regard to Hexagon or another option.
And the equipment replacement. Fund.
Well, I mean, I think for municipality planning, this goes a long way to help that.
And to that point, I did want to mention, I know when we talked about this last, in previous meetings, there had been sort of an assertion that we need to bring billing current. This allows us to continue billing in arrears, which is fantastic for predictability. They're all built on that idea. There's no advanced billing, which can be tricky.
I don't think Elmhurst will have any issue with it.
Else? Good,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Lisa?
So I think we have
What was the-
direction.
I was gonna say, I'm trying to think, is there anything else that me and you need?
Well, I think we're gonna change the language of the reserve fund a little
Yep.
bit to reflect
We will.
what Don was just talking
Yep.
about.
Yes.
Based on, I think there was a consensus there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a consensus.
So other than that, I think that was one of the big,
Yeah, it was that, and then the target amount was our secondary of, that gets us that.
so I think we have a clearer consensus of what needs to be changed so we can get it all to everybody. To get it approved by the agencies.
Answer my questions.
I mean, yeah, well, I think we're on to.
All right, move on to old. Yes.
There was a lot of work that was done with this, and I want to thank Don and the IT staff. I mean, it was very creative to get us to this point.
Thank you, Jeff. And I want to reinforce that. I'm gonna give most of the credit to Don, who after our last conversation came to me and said, hey, I have some thoughts. Do you mind if I put something together and come back to you to see if it makes sense? And that's exactly what he did. And then we took the time to bounce it off of Linda to the finance department, a few of the members, just to make sure that we were heading in the right direction. So we got feedback across the board. But yeah, thank you, Don. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, I think, we want to old business, any old business? Any new business? There being none, how about a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All right, motion and a second. Adjourn. So.